Thank you, James, and welcome all to the 2020 Gala, Della Robbia Gala. This is obviously a virtual event, and I have to admit that this is my Zoom shirt that's been sitting on the back of my chair for a long time. And this is the first time I've worn a tie since back in probably February of this year. But this is a gala, so time to dress up, and I'm sure you are all dressed accordingly. So my talk tonight is about the importance of the past in our present, and especially historic preservation in terms of Milwaukee's history and in terms of these buildings especially. One of the things that makes Milwaukee a special place is how much of the past is preserved in our present. And there are no better examples of that pattern than the two buildings that most of you know very well, the Villa Terrace, a Decorative Arts Museum, and the Charles Allis Art Museum. Both are distinguished survivors from an age of vanished elegance, and both have a vital connection with Milwaukee's industrial past from a time when we were the self-proclaimed machine shop of the world. Villa Terrace, that we are in the Great Hall of today, was built back in 1923 as the home of Lloyd Raymond Smith and his family, Ray Smith as he was known. He ran the A.O. Smith Company, which was founded by his grandfather and grew to become the largest manufacturer of steel automobile frames in the entire world. So they were a very, very big deal. The architect who put this design together was David Adler, who was Milwaukee-born and Chicago-based. And his specialty was period revival styles for affluent clients. And what Adler gave the Smith family was an updated version of a Mediterranean villa, right down to the gate posts on Terrace Avenue. When you come into the gate, both driveways either side, you'll see, first of all, the old street address, 410, which is a pre-1930 address, and also the words Sopra Mare inscribed on the gate posts. That means above the sea in Italian. So the illusion was perfect. You know, here you are above the sea. I have an Italian friend who is somewhat literal-minded, and he said it should be Sopra Lago, which is above the lake. So that'd be more appropriate. I doubt that's going to be changed anytime soon. The Allis Museum is 14 years older. It dates back to 1909. And it was also built in a revival style, in this case, the English Tudor style. The architect was a master from Milwaukee named Alexander Chadbourne Eschweiler, who happened to live just a few blocks north of us here at the villa. And his clients were Charles and Sarah Allis, who were, among other things, very distinguished art collectors. What funded their collecting passion was Charles' position as the first president of the Allis Chalmers Corporation, a business founded by his father and grew to become, as Allis Chalmers, the largest private corporation in the entire state, made everything from tractors to turbines, and at one time had 20,000 employees. So certainly, again, a very, very big deal. What's remarkable about these once private residences is that they are now in the public domain. They are open to all of us. And that's entirely due to the generosity of the Smith and Allis families. The Allis Museum was donated in 1945 and Villa Terrace in 1966. Okay, as all of you know only too well, not every old landmark has received the same respect. The historic preservation movement in Milwaukee and nationally has a rather checkered history. To start with, the very idea was not born until relatively modern times. Our ancestors may have felt kind of a twinge of sadness when old landmarks went down, but that was the price of progress. That's just how they looked at it. In the same way that belching smokestacks meant prosperity and piles of manure meant good street traffic in downtown Milwaukee. The downtown here and elsewhere was made and remade again for a century after those first buildings went up back in the 1830s. The same dynamic that churned other urban landscapes was certainly alive here as well. What set Milwaukee apart in modern times was a relatively slow pace of development. Things ground to a halt for obvious reasons in the Depression of the 1930s, but in Milwaukee at least, they didn't pick up again until after World War II, which ended back in 1945. A New Yorker correspondent who visited Milwaukee back in 1960 penned a memorable description of our town. He wrote, "No new large office building has been put up in downtown Milwaukee in more than 20 years. And the skyline, if approached from Lake Michigan, gives the impression of a city that had its picture taken around 1920, and liked the results so much, it decided to leave matters alone." That was kind of someone from the East Coast looking out here at the provinces. And he had a point. Our first piece of modern public architecture was the War Memorial Center, designed by Eero Saarinen, which went up back in 1957, 12 years after World War II ended. The first modern commercial building in Milwaukee was the Marine Plaza, now Chase Tower, that was finished in 1962 by the same architects that did the United Nations building in New York City. What was going on in Milwaukee and other cities, but certainly clearly here, was what might be described as preservation by neglect, for reasons varying from our innate conservatism to suburban flight, to a reluctance to use urban renewal funds, to a simple lack of development pressure. Milwaukee was slow to get out of the blocks after World War II, and that slow start was hugely important. Our pace did accelerate after 1960. As automobiles became the driving force in American life, Milwaukee was aggressive as any city in clearing huge swaths of land for freeways and replacing older buildings with parking lots. If you look at any aerial photo of downtown Milwaukee from the 1960s, what really grabs your attention is all the blank spots in the landscape. This period of architectural mayhem was relatively short-lived, thank goodness. By 1970, both locally and nationally, a preservation movement had taken root. People finally realized, that once you lose an old landmark, it is gone forever. They finally realized that there is enduring value in these touchstones of the past. In Milwaukee, there was a single wake-up moment. Ever since 1889, the east end of Wisconsin Avenue had been anchored by the graceful red brick tower of the Northwestern Railroad Depot. The years following World War II were a hard time for passenger trains, as railroads were just about pushed into oblivion by the private automobile. In 1960, the Northwestern offered to sell its entire lakefront property to the city of Milwaukee. The city of Milwaukee was not interested. The Greater Milwaukee Committee, the business group, weighed in and declared that the entire lakefront parcel would make a great freeway corridor. Nothing at all was done, and that building became a vacant and vandalized hulk that was finally torn down in 1968. Never again, vowed a fledgling group of preservationists. They knew even then that the depot could and should have been restored and repurposed to serve as the focal point of downtown's East End. Ever since that depot came down, any threat to historic structures has been met with more or less fierce resistance. The public sector made the same commitment. In 1977, the city of Milwaukee adopted officially a preservation policy. In 1981, that policy took institutional form when the Historic Preservation Committee was formed and the ordinance had teeth. The controversies since that time have been frequent. There have been more defeats than victories, but look at the results. See what that post-war slowdown and an informed preservation movement have accomplished. Look at City Hall, both symbol and substance of Milwaukee's identity. Look at the cluster of buildings around Broadway and Michigan. The Mitchell Building, the Mackey, which contains the Grain Exchange, the Old Wisconsin Bank, and the Hilton Garden Inn, housed in what was once a Northwestern Mutual home office. Then check out the commercial buildings across Broadway. If our 19th century ancestors could come back for just one day, they would recognize the intersection. There have been losses, certainly, but so much has been preserved around Broadway, Michigan, that some people would like to preserve the entire ensemble in amber. Now widen your viewpoint to take in neighborhoods like the 3rd Ward, Walker's Point, Yankee Hill, Brewers Hill, and North Point, right here where Villa Terrace stands. Had urban renewal been prosecuted more aggressively, had there not been an active preservation lobby, Milwaukee would look much different today. So why is that important? Whether we're talking about downtown or Milwaukee's residential neighborhoods, why does preservation matter? Because historic structures are literally irreplaceable, because they are definitive makers of place, because we disturb the layered landscape of our moment in time at the risk of losing something much more than bricks and mortar. Without touchstones like City Hall or the Mitchell Building or Villa Terrace or the Charles Alice Museum, we would all be diminished both as a community and as human beings. No, we can't save every building, and it would be delusional, even destructive to try. Cities are living organisms and they need oxygen to breathe. That means new development, certainly, but it also means old development, preserved and revitalized, that enables cities to breathe and to breathe deeply. I sometimes think that architects and planners should all take the Hippocratic Oath, the same one that the physicians swear to, and that is, first, do no harm. If you look around the state, you see the dangers of following architectural fads. Back in the 1970s, the idea was to turn downtowns into enclosed malls to compete with the developments on the urban edge. So Green Bay, Stevens Point, Wausau, to name just 3 cities, erased generations of their own history in pursuit of commerce. They tore down major portions of their business districts and replaced them with malls. Those cities did not anticipate big box retailers. They couldn't imagine the internet or Amazon. Because they couldn't, those downtown malls today are at least struggling and a number of cases demolished, and that damage cannot be undone. When you walk through those downtowns today, you wonder what on earth could they have been thinking? So amputations should certainly be done with the utmost caution, and that applies not just to individual buildings, but also to context. It would be hard to imagine Milwaukee's South Side without St. Joseph's Basilica, or Milwaukee's East Side without the Oriental Theater, but the Basilica needs those Polish flats surrounding it, just as the Oriental needs the commercial storefronts that flank it on Farwell Avenue. Stripped of context, those landmarks would be like roses without gardens, certainly pretty, but denatured in some fundamental way. There's an instructive contrast in the 2 buildings most of you know best. Villa Terrace is part of what you might describe as an architectural ecosystem. The surrounding North Point neighborhood retains much of the character it's had from the very beginning. The Alice Museum, by contrast, is an increasingly isolated island of elegance in a sea of contemporary development. We're lucky to have the Alice, of course, but wouldn't you like to have seen it when it was surrounded by its peers? Urban development, to close, has always required a careful and imperfect balancing of interests that are constantly in flux. Our goal must be to find a middle ground, to honor the past without suffocating in it. Sometimes that means resisting new development. Sometimes it means promoting new development in ways appropriate to our time and our setting. We inherited a built environment from our ancestors. We have used and altered their world, adding here, subtracting there, putting our own unique imprint on it. It's our obligation to pass that world on with all its layers intact, including our own. That is an exalted and delicate task. It means walking a narrow line as both creators of the new and stewards of the old. If we walk that line successfully, if we manage that balance, future Milwaukeeans will be able to look back with insight and appreciation to find in their landscape some vital connection with ours as we become, in our turn, the ancestors.